but it goes to why it is not enough to attack Michael Cohen's credibility or history of lying, because this is all about material that other people are involved in. With evidence.
So it is an elections crime, but it's not necessarily a high crime and misdemeanor, not necessarily the bar for impeachment.
So here I agree with Ari, and here's what I think is now most problematic for the president with respect to the hush money payments. We now know that the crime of trying to suppress this kind of evidence, to hide it from the American people during the election, continued. So he successfully tamped it down. Then it continued through the inaugural period. It continued after he took office. And now we have Michael Cohen saying that that conspiracy, which is an ongoing offense, it's not like a robbery or an assault where it's one and done. We now have a conspiracy, an ongoing crime that moves right into the White House when the president is saying, as he's, showing off the paintings in the Oval Office to Michael Cohen, don't worry. The reimbursement for your hush money payments, it's coming. Now we have crime right in the White House.
Carol, how significant is that? I mean, there is the DOJ memo that says you can't indict a sitting president. There's questions about whether that would hold in a court of law. But how significant is it for a man to implicate the president of the United States in committing a campaign finance crime while he was in the Oval Office?
Well, it's certainly something that is very unusual, right? I don't know that's ever happened before. But on the other hand, the contours of high crimes and misdemeanors is, in the impeachment context, is very uncertain. And the DOJ memo to date has held. And Bob Mueller has sent signals that he intends to respect that. So it may be up to Congress at the end of the day to decide whether they think that this falls within the impeachment realm, or whether the Southern District of New York is going to put together enough of a case that they think they need to go back to the Justice Department and say we need to revisit this policy.
Jeremy, how do you think Michael Cohen's doing?
I think he's coming off as very credible, very remorseful, very pained, and obviously shaken by the turn of events. I mean, this is an astounding account, Katie, the ultimate insider man account. The guy, he was at the elbow of the head of the Trump organization, the presidential candidate, and then the president. And here he is essentially turning on his former boss and saying not only did he engage in substantial financial crimes, but he had a heads up from Roger Stone about the WikiLeaks email dump. He says he suspects that Don Jr. informed his father about the Russia-Trump Tower meeting in June 2016. And on, there are a litany of other allegations, credible allegations that Michael Cohen is levying against his former boss. And I think, of course, the Republicans are trying to rough him up. But at the end of the day, the documents, the credibility of the witness and the facts will be what drives how the Democrats want to take the investigation from here.
It all comes down to credibility, Ari, and we've been having the discussion about credibility all morning. Clearly, the Republicans are trying to undercut Michael Cohen's credibility. But again, he came with documentation, and the things that he doesn't have documentation for, i.e., was there Russia collusion, he said, I don't have evidence of direct collusion between the Trump campaign or Donald Trump and Russia. I have my suspicions, and let me tell you what those are and why I have those. But he admits that he does not have that direct evidence. I
think that's a great point, and he is one of the only people in America right now who's about to go to prison in part for lying to Congress. So he knows better than almost anyone alive why he should not lie today, which goes to the structural pressure on him for his credibility. If I can make one broader point, because here on your show is the first time I've been back on air all day since we've been watching the hearings, just take a step back. We just saw something totally extraordinary. And in these investigations that have been going on in Washington from Mueller and in New York with the SDNY, all the key insiders who've flipped, none of them have spoken under oath in public. None of them. Not Paul Manafort, not Rick Gates, not Michael Flynn, not the other side characters. George Papadopoulos has been out and about, but never under oath. This is literally today the first time we've heard a Mueller witness under oath speak for an extended period of time, addressed by members in both parties. And what he lays out is a damning series of allegations against the sitting president, not all of them crimes, but many of them extraordinary in their own right.
Is this for his benefit, though, or is this at his peril? He's already pleaded guilty to lying to Congress. If he lies to Congress again, I imagine that would get him in a lot more hot water.
Look, I often quote rappers from Brooklyn. I will quote the wisdom of the Italians, cui bono, who benefits. I think you're asking the right question.
Yeah.
Does he stand to benefit? It is possible in the long run, under the rules, that he might later get some reward from other prosecutors. But everything about today's testimony requires his truth at great personal risk, which is why when he says these things, I think any fact finder who doesn't have skin in the game is going to find them interesting. The partisanship we saw on the committee was evident, and I think on both sides to some degree, who are looking for things. But again, to take a step back, this is a Mueller witness who Mueller said in court they found credible on the key points that he testified to, speaking in public and describing a president who basically ran on a lark, used his company for personal enrichment and to deal with dirty deeds, struck unholy alliances with the Inquirer company to bury other stories, lied to the public, lied to other people, allegedly lied to his family. Now, they're allegations, but this is extraordinary. And if you want context, what if this had happened in the middle of the Bush administration or the Obama administration or the Harding administration? America would have a full meltdown.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.